Welcome back to the Living Full Out Show. My name is Nancy Solari, and just as I promised, we have a very inspiring guest coming up now. Imagine being in prison for 2,103 days. I can't even imagine what that would be like. What would you think about for that many days in a row? You know, the torment that this gentleman went through, you know, the shame. There's so many wonderful lessons in his story. I want everyone to listen really closely. Welcome, Charlie Plumb. Captain Charlie Plumb, so happy to have you.
Thank you, Nancy. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, so, wow, there is so much to your story, so much. Let's start with the day that you had got shot down.
19th of May, I was at the top of my game. It was 1967. I'd been a graduate of the Naval Academy, flying the hottest airplane in the world at the time. A proud Navy fighter pilot with 74 combat missions under my belt, and only 5 days until the end of my tour, my return to my wife and a little R&R. I was shot down over North Vietnam, hit by a surface-to-air missile. It exploded some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel we had and sent my co-pilot and me tumbling towards a rice paddy. We both ejected, came floating down in our parachutes. The enemy continued to shoot at us even as we were in our parachutes. I thought that was unnecessary.
Well, like, isn't hard enough that you're going to land in enemy territory?
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you do finally land, what is that moment like? What were you thinking?
Well, I was in shock.
Yeah.
I felt bulletproof. I didn't think that the enemy had a gun big enough to shoot down Charlie Plumb. And so I was pretty much beside myself. Now, I had been trained, and of course, as a fighter pilot, I had pretty good emotional response, and so I tried to maintain a certain amount of reality of it all. And so I started looking for ways to escape. It was in a very crowded area just south of Hanoi, and so there wasn't much way I could escape, but I looked for options. I hit the rice paddy, sunk about waist deep, surrounded immediately by 25 or 30 of the enemy, and they stripped me of everything I had. They took my flight gear, my clothing, my personal possessions.
Wow.
They even eventually took my name and gave me a name from their language just to humiliate me for the next nearly 6 years.
Wow. That to me is just a moment of shock, a moment of where is this going to go? How bad is it going to get? Right? I mean, it's a definite moment.
In a lifetime, you try to plan for the next 5 years, 10 years. You know, I'm thinking what's going to happen in the next 5 seconds. Exactly.
Now, you know, you did go through a lot of torture while you were in this prison. Can you share with us some of the things that they did?
Sure. The main torture we call the rope trick, and it was a series of shackles and manacles and ropes to bend up our body in contortions that you can't even believe. Our shoulders totally out of a joint, our arms behind our back, and we're in a lot of pain for that.
Yeah, I bet. And you know, the thing is they did that to try to break you.
They did, as a matter of fact.
And try to make you feel just like you were all alone, like you, and the thing that stood out to me, and we've talked several times, is they did break you. Tell us about that.
Well, they broke us in several ways, but mostly in limited psychological ways. We kept our base unity, and that was really important in what we did. We kept our faith. They never broke our faith, and so while they got some information from us, most of it was bogus, and we lied a lot. We, as military men, we were supposed to give only name, rank, serial number, date of birth. That's the code of conduct in the military, and unfortunately, we went far, far away from that, but we never gave them any top secret information that they could use. But we felt terrible about going past the code.
Now, you keep saying we, but in that moment, you didn't know.
Oh, I didn't know it at the
You
time.
thought you were the only one
I did.
that gave this false information.
I did.
And you know, taking us back to that moment, how did that make you feel?
I felt very guilty. You know, I felt miserable that I had given in. I flew the skies as the Top Gun fighter pilot. I flew the skies over North Vietnam thinking that if I ever were shot down, surely I was strong enough to give only name, rank, serial number, date of birth, the code of conduct. And I found when I got there that I couldn't. And I felt that everybody else could, and that I was going to have to go home someday and face my squadron mates, the other pilots who were stronger, smarter, more mature, older, who hadn't given in. And so, and incidentally, I found out later that everybody felt that way.
Wow.
Some of the guys even considered suicide rather than expose the fact that they had given in. Felt so guilty about all this.
Well, you know, it's really amazing the amount of honor that everybody had for their country, for the position they had, and that's great. And, you know, I got really chills when you and I talked the first time, because I could really feel that shame that you were feeling, that isolation that you were feeling in your cell. And I remember there was a night that a gentleman and cellmate next to you tried to connect with you. Tell us about that.
Indeed. A fellow passed a wire across a storeroom between our two prison cells and into a little rat hole. He'd been there for 2 years when I got there. Bob Shoemaker pieced together little bits of wire he found around the camp, and he shoved that wire into my cell with a note wrapped around the end of it and a code on the note so that we could communicate with tugs of numbers of tugs indicating various letters of the alphabet. And so I didn't even want to communicate with the guy first. When I saw the wire, I knew, I was pretty sure that it wasn't the enemy. They weren't sophisticated enough to trick me. And so it had to be an American. If it was an American, it was a fighter pilot, because that's who was in the prison camps. And I felt like I really didn't want to talk to a fighter pilot.
You were ashamed.
I was ashamed. I didn't want to, I didn't want to open up to anybody who I assumed had been stronger than I.
You know, it's interesting. At Living Full Out, the whole premise of the show, we talk a lot about opening up, you know, being vulnerable, asking for help. And here you were isolated, alone. Who knows? Your best friend could have been next to you, but you were so ashamed and worried about what he would think. I thought it was so interesting that you had to swallow that piece of paper so the enemies wouldn't find it, so they wouldn't further punish you. But, you know, one day you did decide to finally engage.
Oh, yes.
And boy, did you find out about a huge community of leadership that was there that you didn't know was there. Tell us about that.
It was absolutely the secret to our success, and that we not only survived that experience, but even thrived through it, because we've done great things since we've come home, all of us.
Yeah.
And the key was the communication, and then the organization and the leadership in that camp.
Now there was a code.
A code.
Amongst this secret organization, the secret leadership, there was a code of honor. Tell us about that.
That was probably the defining moment when they said, here's the difference. We're going to redefine this code of conduct, this name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and the way that we're supposed to react. We have found that that's not working. So here's what we're going to do. And the leadership set certain principles, certain plateaus of resistance. And it really made a lot of sense. And the overall guiding principle was 3 simple words: return with honor. And every decision we made was to make that happen, that we were going to return to our country being honorable men. And it worked. First of all, it coalesced this whole organization. You know, these 591 fighter pilots that would communicate with each other and validate each other and support each other. It changed the whole tenor, the whole mood of the camp.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was so interesting is this community was built, and you were saying to me that even the guys that were there the longest had the most mental stability, where the guys who came later felt more alone.
The guys who were shot down near the end of the war, who were only in prison camps for a few weeks or a month or two, I feel like didn't have the time that it takes to process the value of forgiveness to begin with, and for the value in a negative experience.
Right.
I am convinced that adversity is a horrible thing to waste, that within every challenge we face, there's an opportunity. And it's easy to blame somebody else for the problem and feel sorry for ourselves and feel like we have no control of our destiny. And that's just giving away control of our lives.
Well, and I love that. I love that. And there's so many parallels to what you encountered at the prisons, to natural life, to what we do every day.
Certainly.
And I just want all the viewers to really take this in. This communication, this community that you learned about was taught to you, was delivered to you by scratches on the walls and tugs, and you learned about all of this through that communication. That's amazing.
It was a very slow, very slow,
Tedious.
and tedious process. And when you think, as a friend, as a leader, that you have a mission to accomplish with a group of people, but oh, by the way, you can't see them, you can't fire them, you can't hire them, you can't motivate them other than just tapping on a wall or tugging on a wire.
That, to me, that is the most amazing thing, because in normal communication, sometimes we'll say words and we misfire, let alone a tug and a scratch and what that means. You know, building, drawing the connection between what you learned in the camps to everyday life. I mean, that's what you've really dedicated your life to.
Absolutely.
Tell us more about that.
Well, I believe in every situation you have a choice, and I think that I am living proof of that. We came home, and of 591 men, we have produced 16 generals, 6 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We went back to flying airplanes and commanding squadrons and ships, and we have 2 United States senators, a vice presidential candidate, a presidential candidate, and we've done amazing things because we decided to take that adversity, and rather than be bound by it, we were actually inspired by it. It gave us a confidence, I think, that we couldn't possibly have had.
Well, and you give me confidence because you have so much energy, so much inspiration. No one would ever know that you were in a prison for 2,103 days. Like, I have to keep saying it because it blows me away. And you're so humble and loving.
Well, thank you.
And, you know, when you came back, things had changed. They weren't the same.
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
I had married my high school sweetheart the day after I graduated from the Naval Academy, under the arch of swords that my buddies were holding up outside the chapel.
Lovely.
It was, and she is a lovely lady, and she hung on as best she could for 5 years, and then filed for divorce just 3 months before I came home.
Wow.
Complete shock to me, and again, one more choice. And I said to myself when I found that out, all right, you didn't learn much in that prison camp, that little cell of education, but you did learn this, is that if you can survive something like that, you can survive a challenge like this. And so let's look for the good part of it. To begin with, she had it tougher than I did, I feel. She was 24, as I was when I was shot down, 30 when I came home. She spent 6 years of her life trying to be faithful to a guy she couldn't see, she couldn't talk to, she didn't know if I was alive or dead, and if I ever came home, would I be a burden to her the rest of her life?
Which for some people, that was the case.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. Although you are worth waiting for, Mr. Charlie Plumb. You know, it's to me, kind of wrapping up today, and I could talk to you for hours. But, you know, one of the things that stood out to me is that you were so grateful for so many simple things, but especially a door handle on the inside of a door, right? You know, the ability to walk out when you want to. Simple pleasures.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true. I am very grateful for simple pleasures of life.
Yeah. Well, we are grateful for you, and, you know, keep going and sharing your message because, you know, I do believe that sometimes in life we're all in a prison. You were in a literal prison, and for all those, you know, our audience here who may feel as though they're in their own emotional prison or physical prison, like Charlie Plumb, you can get out of it. Inspiration, motivation, if you grab hold of it, embrace it, and live with it in your heart and soul, you can be just like Charlie.
Okay, well,
All
thank
right?
you for that.
Absolutely. You're a friend of
appreciate
mine,
it.
my
Thank
dear.
you. Thank
and
you.
Thank you again. So we'll be right back. We have another great interview coming up and so inspiring. Imagine giving birth to a son that is blind and autistic. The challenges that could come with that. Stay tuned.